Okay, let's get into diminishing returns. Okay. So we kind of gave you a holdout testing example here. So we're holding out audiences here. Now, what is diminishing returns? Why do we care about it? And what's the situation here? So as we talked about this, again, this pyramid notion, if you kind of go back to the pyramid notion, you have really strong audiences here, weak audiences here. As you come down, as the targeting starts by targeting the best audiences and walks down this pyramid to target weaker audiences, your last click conversion rates obviously will degrade, right? So it might have, typically it'll have like a situation like this. It'll kind of slowly degrade and it'll fall off a cliff. Okay, it's kind of how these models are kind of built like that, where you kind of find a bunch of good audiences, and then that's all. You're kind of out of your audiences, right? Then you have really crappy audiences, so it'll kind of fall off a cliff. It's kind of how it'll look like, right? So this is diminishing return on your conversion rate. This is diminishing return projected on the conversion rate dimension. Okay. Now, if you look at this from a revenue, ROAS, spend perspective, and this is what we call the trade-off curve. Sometimes we call it the Pareto curve, right? As you increase spend, your campaign revenue will go up, and it'll start flatlining. It'll saturate. Right? I'm sure you've seen many curves like this where conversions revenue go up like this and start saturating. Similarly, in the same time, if this is ROAS will slowly diminish and drop off, right? It's kind of what you're expecting your campaigns to do when you're in this. This is again an academic classroom notion of what you're expecting to see. In the real world, of course, it won't be as clean as I'm projecting here. Okay. The key question is that let's say you're spending $100,000 a year, week here, right? This is, imagine your current spend. When you add an additional $50,000, are you going to be here? Are you going to be here in the curve? How far is it going to move you in this curve, right? Is the curve kind of like, is it doing this or is it doing this, right? It's hard to tell. The answer is we don't know. We have to test for it, right? And that's why we need diminishing return, or what we call scale testing, right? So here is a scale testing example. Let's go through the scale testing example. Just like how we did the holdout testing example, this is the scale testing example. Okay, so similar example here, control markets, test markets, right? In the test markets, you want to scale into Facebook. You want to add another 50% more spend on Facebook. You're spending 120K here, adding another 60K here. What will happen? When you add 60K, naturally, you won't get the same linear amount of growth. It'll diminish, right? So that's what it's, for the additional 60K, you're getting $185,000. $185,000 represents a 20% diminishing return. So you're getting 20% diminished return for the marginal investment you're making. So that is the calculation you're trying to get to here, right? This is basically the simple version of diminishing return calculation using geotesting. A similar approach can also be taken using split testing in a lift test format. You can also take 10%, 20% audience, and you can scale that audience by 2x, 50%, 60%, whatever, and figure out what this diminished return. All right, so we talked about, you can do a similar kind of a test using platform lift test also. We can also double down, triple down in platform lift test. Much easier to execute than in a geo test, but of course, very opaque, right? There's another approach specifically for scale testing is called split testing, okay? Now, a lot of you marketers like Jennifer, if you're working with Facebook as an example, now what you can do is you can take imagine this is your ad set, okay? And broad audiences, and you're spending, let's call it a week. You're spending $21,000 a week on this audience, okay? It's delivering at this conversion rate. It's delivering so many last touch conversions at a $56 CPA. You've already tested it for a multiplier before, it's 70%. So you're out of this 375, 263 are incremental, and your incremental CPA is not 56, it's $80. You know all this, okay? But you're like, wow, this $80 is good. My target CPA is 120. I've got room here. I can scale this campaign. I really want to spend more on a weekly basis. Okay. So, but you don't want to burn your fingers doing that. You don't want to like increase it and end up not having ROAS. And you're like, my CFO will kill me if I do that. So how do I do this in a way that is risk mitigated? Is what you can do is you can split this audience into a 90%, 10%. Okay. So you can take 10% of the same audience. In that 10% audience, let's say you spend $5,700. This $5,700, because the 10% sell represents $57,000 in this cell, the 100% sell. right? So you're now testing what would happen if you spend $57,000. When you do that, is an observed conversion rate. It went from 0.25 to 0.022%. So 12% diminishing return here, right? You scale the budgets to 74%. There's a modest diminishing return. And you can see the flow here, right? All the way from last click conversion rates, apply the same multiplier, true conversions, and CPA. What is the CPA? 70, where's my CPA? Here, ICP, $103, right? What's the marginal CPA? It's incremental CPA, $103, marginal CPA, $125. All of this you can just calculate. The beauty about this is very fast to execute. This will take you a while, right? These things take you a while to execute, and it's more because you're doing it at the geo level, everything is causal to the business. Here, if you can accept the multiplier, if you can say, hey, I've got a 70% multiplier, I'm happy with it, I'm happy to use it, all of a sudden you can use a split test. A split test you can run at the ad set level, campaign level, right? You can run multiple ad sets and put them into multiple cells and execute like this. You can do, Eli, you're talking about how do I scale, 200%, 300%, 400%. You can do 10%, 10%, 10% very quickly. In a week, you can get statistically significant results and understand what the diminishing return curves is for this particular ad set. So when I've done this before, we would do it across multiple ad sets. We will test it at different levels of scale. And within, if you have 5, 7 ad sets, you'll find that 2 or 3 of them have actual scale potential, and 2 or 3 of them are not. They are going to cap out. So now you are test, learn, grow, test, learn, grow. You're identifying the audiences and ad sets that have scale and executing by removing the risk out of the scale execution and only scaling the ad sets that actually have juice in them. Okay, this is an incredibly powerful technique. It's very underused in the industry for whatever reason. And I think it's a huge opportunity for marketers in the class to take advantage.